Are the people most opposed to Donald Trump actually aiding his election? I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia. Tuesday is the New Hampshire primary, the GOP race in the Granite State, thought to be a two-person affair, Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. If Trump becomes the first non-incumbent Republican to win both the Iowa caucus and an open New Hampshire primary, he will be the de facto nominee of his party. But New Hampshire could prove more hospitable for Haley. It's less evangelical and home to more libertarians and independents. So Haley is all in. And so too are many institutional forces which see time running out to stop Trump. But are some of those efforts backfiring? Mark Halpern, in his Wide World of News newsletter, regularly chronicles this phenomenon, which he calls the sad irony of those members of the media and the Democratic Party who most worry about a Trump second term, acting in ways that actually make it more likely he will win. Here's an example. On Monday, MSNBC had the kind of all-night extensive coverage of the Iowa caucus that we've come to expect of cable outlets. But when it came time for Trump to make his acceptance speech, the network didn't air it. Instead, Rachel Maddow said this.
At this point in the evening, the projected winner of the Iowa caucuses has just started giving his victory speech. We will keep an eye on that as it happens. We will let you know if there's any news made in that speech, if there's anything noteworthy, something substantive and important. The reason I'm saying this is, of course, there is a reason that we and other news organizations have generally stopped giving an unfiltered live platform to remarks by former President Trump. It is not out of spite. It is not a decision that we relish. It is a decision that we regularly revisit. And honestly, earnestly, it is not an easy decision.
By the way, CNN did take Trump's speech live for about the first 10 minutes before getting out. Ignoring Trump's electoral success is a way of putting a thumb on the scale and will redound to his benefit. It also sets a poor precedent. If he wins the Republican nomination, will some cover the convention, but not his acceptance speech? If he wins the presidency, will there be a blackout on the inauguration? I doubt Trump would have won over the MSNBC audience. His base was watching elsewhere. But of course, they've been made aware of the slight, and it will now be added to their festivus of grievances against institutional forces they see as seeking to deny voters a chance to elect Trump. And at the top of that list are states like Colorado and Maine trying to knock Trump off the ballot by asserting that he's an insurrectionist under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Harvard professor Lawrence Lessig was my guest here 2 weeks ago. Lessig is no fan of Trump. In fact, he calls him astoundingly dangerous. But Lessig also believes that while electing Trump would be the worst political decision of the nation since the Civil War, excluding him wrongfully by a close vote of the Supreme Court could well trigger the next Civil War. Says Lessig, we must defeat him politically, not through clever lawyer interpretations of ambiguous constitutional texts. In the eyes of Trump's base and perhaps some independents, the 14th Amendment challenge only underscores what they already think about the 4 criminal indictments that Trump faces, namely that they're politically motivated. That's why in entrance polls, roughly 2/3 of Iowa voters said they'll stick with Trump even if he's convicted. And consider that 2/3 of caucus goers said President Biden didn't legitimately win the 2020 election, and about 7 in 10 of those voters, they supported Donald Trump. And then there's Hunter Biden. Just this week, the Justice Department finally confirmed they took possession of the laptop. You'll remember in the fall of 2020 when some of the contents of the laptop's hard drive made its way to the New York Post, President Biden and his supporters argued that it had all the makings of Russian disinformation. And social media companies suppressed or blocked access to the Post's article about it. This past Wednesday, Congressman Jim Jordan revealed that federal investigators had asked financial institutions to use search terms such as Trump and MAGA when combing over customer data in the aftermath of the January 6th Capitol riot. All of this makes his supporters furious. They see an establishment aligned against Trump, especially the media, and even where they don't rely on the outlets, they're aware of how they seem to be working in concert to defeat their candidate. The entire January-February issue of The Atlantic dedicated to warnings about if Trump wins. Countless editorials from newspapers similarly predicting the horrors of a second Trump term. An editorial in the LA Times, Trump wants to be U.S. first dictator. The New York Times, why a second Trump presidency may be more radical than his first. Rolling Stone, every awful thing Trump has promised to do in a second term. And The Atlantic, Trump wants revenge and so does his base. All of the criticism it preaches to the converted. And it causes MAGA to close ranks around their candidate, even when his statements are outrageous and playing on racist tropes. Consider the way that his comment that illegal migrants are poisoning the blood of the nation, it's been shown on a loop. But GOP primary voters, they like what they heard. 81% of them, they agree with Trump. And immigration and the economy were also the biggest issues for Iowa caucus goers, with over a third naming each as their most important issue in their vote. These were both reasons why JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon gave Trump props this week in Davos.
When people say MAGA, they're actually looking at people voting for Trump, and they think they're voting, and they're basically scapegoating them, that you are like him. But I don't think they're voting for Trump because of his family values. Now, if you look, just take a step back, be honest. He was kind of right about NATO, kind of right about immigration. Mm-hmm. He grew the economy quite well. He wasn't wrong about some of these critical issues, and that's why they're voting for him. And I think people should be a little more respectful of our fellow citizens. I think this negative talk about MAGA is going to hurt Biden's election campaign.
Dimon makes the point that if there's not more respect toward the 74 million of our fellow citizens who voted for Donald Trump, it could end up hurting Biden, just as it did Hillary Clinton when she said half of Donald Trump's supporters belong in a basket of deplorables. This week on my SiriusXM radio program, a caller seemed to embody exactly what Jamie Dimon was discussing.
We can't possibly have Trump run again. I would never vote for him. And I must have said it 5 times preceding the Iowa caucuses. And then the next day, you hear that they didn't carry his speech, and I go, maybe I will vote for him. Just if nothing else, just to stick it in Rachel's face going, you're not going to decide what I'm going to do.
Here's the bottom line. Donald Trump doesn't need to motivate his base. His opponents are doing that for him.